Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to make a line graph on Excel with error bars. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you've taken the data from your table and put it into an Excel format in which you have the independent variable in the first column, your dependent variable or your calculated value, whatever that may be, in the second column, and your standard deviation in the third column. So to make the graph initially, we will select the first two columns. We'll deal with the standard deviation later. So select those columns and insert a scatter plot. We are going to choose the scatter plot as opposed to the connect the dot version, because we can always add a trend line later. So select scatter plot, and you should see something that looks like this. Immediately I will remove this legend on the right hand side as it adds no value to the graph itself. So click on it and press delete. The other thing that's obvious to me is the fact that my y-axis is extended too far. I do not want it going to 1.2 as my final measurement was 1 molar of sucrose concentration. So to amend that, we will go to Layout and Axes. This is a horizontal axis, pardon me, and we will go to more options. And there you can see here that my axis ends at 1.2. In fact, I want that to end at 1.0, and I make that change and close. Immediately you can see my graph ends where it is meant to end. So the next thing that we may want to add are error bars. So on the layout menu, you will notice error bars on the right hand side. We are going to go to more error bar options. And here we want to choose custom. We want to specify our values for our error bars. And we will move this out of the way initially. So let's specify our value as being our first range, our positive value. We want to select the entire standard deviation column, and we want the exact same for our negative error value as well, and click OK. So immediately when I close this, I notice my graph has totally changed. For some reason I have horizontal error bars. There's no telling why these have shown up. I'm going to highlight those and delete them and get something that's far more appropriate for my graph. You can check your error bars by verifying the values, and we should see that they are all different. If, for example, you look at the 0.6 molar, up here, 0.6 molar, my error bar should be at almost half of a percentage unit. And in fact, that is pretty close to what we're having here. If you look at 0.2 molar, that error bar is much smaller, and that is in fact what we should see as indicated by our standard deviation values, in this case of 0.08. Now what's left to do is we definitely have to add a trend line. So trend line is going to be a line of best fit. I find it easier to go to more trend line options. In almost every case in IB biology, we're going to select a linear trend line, and you notice that is immediately shown. I also want to have my r² value. This is a measure of how accurate that trend line is. It's called a correlation coefficient, and it gives us an idea whether that trend line is like the data points are scattered from the trend line or whether they're relatively close. The closer we are to 1, the more highly correlated our data is. If our R value was closer to 0, we would see data points scattered among the graph with a line in between them. And there would be very little correlation between the data points themselves and the trend line that was drawn. The final step in preparing our graph for our lab report is to give it a meaningful title. Title should always mention the independent and dependent variables. In this case, I am graphing the average % change in mass of potato cylinders in varying sucrose concentrations. All right, so I click off of that. The next thing I want to do is change my axis labels, or in this case add axis labels. And in this case we always want to make sure that we are including units whenever possible. And we had sucrose concentration, and our unit was molar or moles per liter. Then the vertical axis, I usually like the rotated title option. We measured percent change in mass, actually average percent change in mass. And our units in this case are percent. So the suggestion I would make to you is make your graph big so that all trends can be viewed, and then just cut and paste it into your lab report. Hope you enjoyed my first screencast.